Paris, on the morning of October 15th, 1917. The air was cold and pale, the kind of light that makes even the living look like ghosts. 12 soldiers stood in a muddy courtyard, rifles raised. Before them stood a woman in a tailored blue coat, her dark hair pinned neatly beneath a tricorn hat. She refused the blindfold. She looked at them, not with fear but with an odd, quiet grace. When the order was given, the rifles fired, and the name Mata Hari became legend. For more than 100 years, she has been remembered as the ultimate traitor, the exotic temptress who seduced generals and sold secrets. But behind that legend was someone else, a broken daughter, an abandoned wife, a grieving mother, a woman who turned illusion into armor in a world that punished those who dared to live freely. The command was given, a single breath, then the sound of gunfire. Her body fell, but her face remained peaceful, as if she had simply finished her last dance. This is Old Time Docs. Tonight we peel back the myths and strip away the myth to meet the woman beneath it. They called her Mata Hari, the most dangerous woman in Europe. But before she was a myth, she was Margaretha Zell. Who was she, and why did the world need her to die? Was she truly a spy, or simply a woman too modern for her time? Today, in her hometown of Leeuwarden, Mata Hari still stands not as flesh, but as bronze. The statue was raised in 1976, then struck down by vandals who claimed she had disgraced the nation. It was later restored, yet even now locals lower their voices when passing by. Some call her a dancer, others a traitor. To most, she is a wound that never fully healed. Inside the Fries Museum, her life remains preserved in fragments: a silk shawl, a dance costume, and letters she wrote while waiting for execution. The handwriting is careful, almost calm, as if she wanted history to see her not as a spy, but as a mother asking for forgiveness. One reads, "Do not think that I am a bad woman." That letter was addressed to her daughter Nan, who would die only a few years later, at 21. Outside the museum, a bridge now bears her true name, Margaretha Gertrude Zell. It crosses the canal like an apology a century too late. Here the Dutch say her ghost still walks on misty mornings, her reflection trembling in the water beneath the bronze. Few remember that the woman the world called Mata Hari never once used that name in her letters. To the end, she signed them simply, Margaretha. And perhaps that is where the story truly begins. Not with a spy or a seductress, but with a woman who wanted to be seen and was never understood. Long before the name Mata Hari became legend, she was simply Margaretha Zell, a little girl born in the quiet Dutch town of Leeuwarden in the summer of 1876. Her father, Adam Zell, owned a hat shop on the main street, and he loved his daughter more than anything in the world. He called her his little princess and dressed her in silk ribbons and lace even when the family could barely afford it. To the neighbors, he seemed boastful, a man playing at nobility, but to Margaretha, he was a magician who could turn every day into a story. When she walked through town beside him, holding his gloved hand, she felt the gaze of others and believed she was special. He taught her French words, fine manners, and the idea that life was meant to be beautiful. For a time it was, then the illusions began to crack. Adam's business failed, debts grew, and one evening he packed his bags and left for The Hague to chase another dream. Margaretha, only 12, watched her mother's health fade and her family's comfort vanish. The laughter that once filled their house turned to silence. When her mother died of tuberculosis, the world she had known ended. The children were divided among relatives. Margaretha was sent to live with her godparents, strangers bound by duty rather than love. In their gray house, the days felt long and airless. The little girl who had once been her father's jewel now learned the meaning of being forgotten. At 16, she was sent to a boarding school. There, the headmaster, a man old enough to be her grandfather, preyed upon her youth and curiosity. When their secret came to light, he remained respected while she was expelled in disgrace. That was the first time she understood how the world judged women. The shame was hers alone, though the sin had never been. She left the school with nothing but a suitcase and a wound that would never fully heal. From that moment, she carried a new belief. If beauty could destroy her, then beauty could also save her. It became her weapon, her protection, and her mask. In the years to come, it would lead her across oceans, through palaces, and finally to a muddy field at dawn. At 18, Margaretha Zell made a choice that would change the course of her life. She answered a newspaper advertisement placed by a Dutch army officer named Rudolf MacLeod, a man more than 20 years her senior, stationed in the East Indies. He was looking for a wife, respectable and cultured. She sent him her photograph. Dark eyes, calm smile, and the quiet pride of someone who had already seen too much of the world. He proposed by letter, and within months she accepted. Their wedding took place in the summer of 1895, in a small ceremony attended by family and officers in uniform. The bride wore white, her face composed, her heart filled with the hope that perhaps this new world would give her back the safety she had lost. After the wedding, the couple left for the Dutch East Indies, sailing across endless waters toward a land of palm trees and monsoon skies. At first, Margaretha believed she had found paradise. The air was warm and heavy with the scent of spice. The colors of the tropics dazzled her eyes. She learned to ride, to dance, to move with confidence among the officers' wives. But beneath the beauty, there was loneliness. Her husband drank heavily, his temper quick to rise. He admired her in public and humiliated her in private. The passion of their early days turned into suspicion and anger. In January of 1897, she gave birth to a son, Norman John. For a brief time, motherhood brought her peace. She held her baby close and dreamed of a quieter future. But the calm did not last. The gossip among the colonial families grew cruel. They whispered that her dark hair and olive skin made her look too native, too different. To them, she would never be a true European lady. Rudolph's jealousy deepened. He accused her of affairs, while hiding his own infidelities behind the walls of their house. The violence worsened. He struck her, sometimes in front of the servants. She endured in silence, clinging to her children, Norman and the little girl Jean. Then tragedy came. One night in June of 1899, their son fell violently ill. His body burned with fever, his small chest rising and falling in pain. She tried to comfort him, rocking him through the night. When the morning came, the boy was gone. In her arms lay only stillness. No doctor could explain what had happened. Some whispered of poison, others of disease, but to Margaretha, it no longer mattered. Her child was dead, and with him, the last tenderness in her marriage. After the funeral, the house felt empty. Her husband grew crueler. He waved a pistol in drunken rage, threatened her life, and beat her with a whip. By the autumn of 1902, she escaped and filed for divorce. The court granted it, but she was left with nothing. No money, no home, no child. Rudolph kept their daughter, promising to provide for her, and then vanished from her life. Margaretha walked away with only her name and her grief. The world she entered next would not pity her, but it would give her a stage, and she would learn to play her role better than anyone before or after her. In the winter that followed her divorce, Margaretha wandered through the gray streets of The Hague. She was 26, alone, and almost penniless. The cold bit through her coat, and she learned to live on little more than coffee and pride. Her father, once her protector, could no longer help her. Letters to him went unanswered. Each passing day felt heavier than the last. Then came Paris, the city of second chances. She arrived in 1903 with a single trunk and a heart full of defiance. The city dazzled her. Gas lamps shimmered on wet cobblestones. Carriages rattled through the boulevards, and cafe windows glowed with golden light. She decided that if the world had taken everything from her, she would take something back. At first, she earned small wages, teaching dance and performing in a circus as a horsewoman. Her beauty drew attention, but it was her presence that lingered. She moved with the calm of someone who had survived disaster and learned to hide the cracks. A theater manager told her she had something different, a quality that could not be taught. He advised her to turn her tragedy into art. In the spring of 1905, Paris gathered to witness something entirely new. A woman from the colonies, tall and dark-eyed, was said to perform sacred dances from distant temples of the East. The hall at the Museum of Oriental Art filled long before dusk. 600 guests pressed forward, waiting for the spectacle to begin. When the music started, a low, haunting melody filled the air. From behind a screen of silk, she appeared. Her arms crossed upon her chest, her head adorned with flowers, her body wrapped in thin veils that shimmered in the light. Slowly, she began to move. Each motion seemed deliberate, like a prayer. Her hands traced the air. Her hips swayed in a rhythm that felt both ancient and forbidden. One by one, the veils fell away until she stood before the audience, not as a dancer, but as a vision. Then, with a final bow toward a statue of Shiva, she collapsed to her knees as if in divine surrender. The room erupted in applause. That night made her famous. The newspapers called her Mata Hari, meaning the eye of the day in Malay. She told them she had been born in Java and trained by priestesses in the sacred arts of dance. None of it was true, but the public did not care. They wanted wonder, and she gave it to them. Her story was part performance, part confession, and all illusion. Soon the wealthiest salons of Paris competed to host her. Kings, diplomats, and bankers watched from velvet chairs as she turned her pain into art. To them, she was not a person, but a symbol. A goddess from a world they longed to possess. She moved through their gaze like a spell, commanding both worship and desire. Critics debated whether she was a dancer or a courtesan. To Mata Hari, there was no difference. She understood that beauty was a kind of power, and mystery was its strongest weapon. Each performance became a transaction of fantasy. She gave them the dream of the East, and in return they gave her money, gifts, and devotion. By the end of that year, she was the most sought-after woman in Paris. Her name appeared in every paper. Her portraits sold in shops across Europe. She dined with princes, traveled in private carriages, and slept beneath silks finer than those she once wore on stage. For a girl who had once begged for warmth in a Dutch winter, it felt like triumph. Yet somewhere inside her, a quiet voice whispered that nothing built on illusion could last forever. Success, like perfume, can fade the moment you stop breathing it in. By the winter of 1906, Mata Hari had become both adored and envied. She was no longer just a performer. She was a phenomenon. Every man in Paris wanted her, and every woman wanted to be her. She lived in a suite filled with orchids and smoke, her walls lined with gifts from admirers whose names she never bothered to remember. But fame has a way of turning friends into creditors. Her jewels, her gowns, her horses, they all came with invisible strings. Behind every diamond was a man expecting to be repaid, not in money, but in affection. And Mata Hari, who had once learned to survive on charm, began to find that charm was a dangerous form of currency. She became the mistress of Alfred Kiepert, a German officer whose wealth and status kept her in silks and champagne. He adored her, and she adored what he could provide. It was not love, but an arrangement. She had no illusions left about romance. After all, love had cost her everything once before: her child, her freedom, her peace. Now, she played the game on her own terms. "I take what is offered," she once said, "and I pay only with illusion." Her name crossed borders. In Berlin, Vienna, and Monte Carlo, she danced before kings and generals. She arrived with stories of sacred rituals and departed with trunks full of cash and gossip. But success bred imitation. Dozens of women began performing Oriental dances, copying her veils and gestures. The mystery she had invented was no longer hers alone. To stay ahead, she pushed the illusion further, claiming noble blood, lost temples, lovers who died in her arms. Each lie gilded her legend, but also chained her to it. And then there were the debts. She spent more than she earned, convinced the next performance, the next patron, would make it right. Her manager begged her to slow down, but she laughed. "I was born to be admired," she said, "not to balance accounts." She rented a villa near Paris, filled it with mirrors and peacocks, and lived as if the applause would never end. By 1912, the offers grew fewer, the gossip louder. The same men who once toasted her now whispered that she was past her prime. She tried to reinvent herself again, first as a respectable widow, then as a woman of letters, but the city that had created her no longer believed the act. The illusion was cracking, though she refused to admit it. When the lights dimmed and the audience dispersed, Mata Hari was left alone with her reflection, and the reflection no longer looked back with awe. Yet she could not stop performing. The stage was her refuge and her trap. Every bow, every gesture, was both a confession and a disguise. She was still beautiful, still dangerous. But now there was something else in her eyes, the faint shimmer of fear. Because deep down, she knew what every legend eventually learns. When the world stops believing in your story, it begins to write its own. By the summer of 1914, Europe trembled. Rumors of war drifted across the continent like smoke. In cafes, men whispered about alliances and invasions, while orchestras still played as if nothing had changed. For Mata Hari, the world's tension was just another backdrop, another stage. She was nearly 40 now, though her mirrors still told her she was timeless. Her performances had grown fewer, her patrons more fleeting, but she refused to fade into the gray. Then the war came. The carriages stopped. The theaters darkened. The men who once filled her salons traded champagne for rifles. Borders closed, fortunes vanished, and a new kind of suspicion took hold. Suspicion of foreigners, of travelers, of anyone whose loyalties were unclear. And Mata Hari, Dutch by birth but global by reputation, was suddenly all of those things. When the war broke out, she was in Berlin. Her bank accounts were frozen, her jewels seized, her contracts canceled. The empire that had worshipped her turned cold overnight. She packed what she could and fled to Holland, penniless once again. There she met Baron van der Capellen, a former admirer who tried to offer her stability, but peace had never suited her. She missed the applause, the perfume, the sense of being desired. And so, when opportunity knocked again, she opened the door. Colonel Kramer, the German consul in Amsterdam, came calling one afternoon. He knew her reputation, the famous dancer, the courtesan, the woman who could enter any salon in Europe. He offered her 20,000 francs in exchange for intelligence. He called it a small favor. She accepted the money, perhaps out of vanity, perhaps out of hunger, or perhaps because she believed she owed herself one last grand performance. She never sent him a single secret, but the payment sealed her fate. From that day forward, Mata Hari was marked. Later, when asked about it, she laughed. "I took their money," she said, "but I never sold them anything except dreams." Yet in wartime, dreams can look a lot like betrayal. France, desperate for victories and drowning in paranoia, saw spies everywhere in waiters, in widows, in women who had loved the wrong men. Mata Hari, with her foreign passport, her lovers in uniform, and her taste for mystery, was an easy target. By 1916, she returned to Paris. The city had changed. Blackout curtains replaced chandeliers, and laughter had grown brittle. Officers filled the cafes, their faces drawn from sleepless nights at the front. Among them was a young Russian pilot named Vadim Maslov. He was 21, she nearly 40, but their love burned fast and bright. For the first time in years, she felt something like innocence return. When he was wounded at the front, she swore to see him again, and that vow, innocent as it seemed, would push her into a world she could not control. In her desperation to reach him, she sought a travel permit to visit his hospital near the front lines. That simple request brought her into the office of Captain Georges Ledoux, head of French military intelligence. He studied her across his desk, his tone smooth, his eyes sharp. France, he told her, needed loyal citizens, even beautiful ones. If she wished to serve, she could. All she had to do was listen, observe, report. She agreed, not knowing that the man across from her had already marked her as expendable. For Mata Hari, it was just another role to play the loyal patriot, the secret agent, the woman of intrigue. But this was no stage, and her audience this time carried rifles instead of roses. She thought she could move through espionage as she had through love, charming the truth out of men and slipping away untouched. But war is never charmed for long. Every promise she made, every favor she accepted, drew her deeper into a web of deception from which there was no escape. By the early months of 1917, Mata Hari's life had become a labyrinth of borders, telegrams, and lies, some hers, most not. She had agreed to help Captain Georges Ledoux, believing that in serving France, she might buy her way back into respectability. In truth, he had never trusted her. The moment she walked out of his office, the traps were already being laid. Every letter she sent, every train ticket she purchased, every man she spoke to was quietly noted in files stamped suspicious. Ledoux knew that France was desperate for someone to blame. The war had dragged on too long. Too many sons had died in mud, and too few victories had followed. The government needed a scapegoat, a traitor whose punishment would restore public faith. And in the eyes of the military, there was no better candidate than a woman who had once been paid by Germany, danced for kings, and taken lovers in uniform. She was foreign, beautiful, and already half legend. Condemning her would be theater, and France loved theater almost as much as revenge. Mata Hari thought she was still in control. When she traveled to Madrid in late 1916, she believed she was carrying out her first mission for the French. She met with Captain Karl von Kalle, a German officer, hoping to extract information to pass along to Ledoux. They spoke over wine, and he mentioned the arrival of a submarine off the coast of Morocco. It was the kind of gossip that passed easily between lovers, and she took it as a small success. She wrote a detailed letter to Ledoux, filling 12 pages with her findings, embellishing the details to sound more valuable than they were. She believed it would prove her loyalty. Instead, it sealed her fate. Unbeknownst to her, the Germans had intercepted her name in coded transmissions, Agent H-21. They sent those messages using an outdated cipher that the French had already broken. When Ledoux's office decrypted them, they saw what they wanted to see. Mata Hari, paid by the enemy. The irony was cruel. The messages were never truly hers. They had been planted by the Germans themselves, perhaps to mislead, perhaps to mock. But to Ledoux, it was proof enough. When she returned to Paris in February 1917, she sensed that something had shifted. Her lovers were distant. Her money had run out. Letters from her Russian pilot had stopped. She grew paranoid, convinced that men followed her through the foggy streets. She was right. For months, French intelligence had tracked her every move, noting every hotel, every dinner, every whispered conversation. They found no secret documents, no codes, no evidence of espionage, only her usual trail of debts and admirers. But Ledoux had made up his mind. He needed a conviction, not the truth. On the morning of February 13th, she was arrested at the Hotel Élysée Palace. The police found her fully dressed, calm, and defiant. When the commissioner read the warrant, she smiled faintly and asked if she might change her clothes before they left. Even in disgrace, she refused to be humiliated. She was taken to Saint-Lazare prison, a place of shadows and stench where her silks were traded for coarse prison cloth. The woman who once demanded a marble bath now washed in a metal basin under the gaze of rats. For weeks, she endured endless interrogations. The questions circled like vultures: names, dates, lovers, payments. She gave them fragments of truth and embellishment, unsure what would save her. She admitted to accepting money from the Germans, insisting it had been compensation for stolen property. Her words were twisted into confession. Captain Pierre Bouchardon, her interrogator, saw her not as a spy but as a symbol of moral decay. In her he found everything he despised: vanity, sensuality, defiance. When he looked at her, he did not see evidence. He saw a woman who had lived as if she owed men nothing, and that was crime enough. In the silence of her cell, Mata Hari began to understand. This was not an investigation, it was a performance. One last stage where she would be forced to play the villain they had written for her. And this time, there would be no applause at the end. The trial of Mata Hari began in July of 1917. It was held behind closed doors in a military court at the Palais de Justice in Paris. No press, no public, no witnesses beyond a chosen few. Outside, the city baked under summer heat, and soldiers marched toward a war that no longer promised victory. Inside, 12 officers sat in uniform, their medals gleaming under dim light, their minds already made up. Mata Hari entered the courtroom in a tailored suit of gray. Her wrists were bare, her head held high. The guards expected tears or hysteria. Instead, she smiled faintly, as if greeting an audience before the curtain rose. For her, dignity was the last luxury she could still afford. The charges were read: espionage, treason, betrayal of France. They accused her of passing military secrets to the Germans, of causing the deaths of 50,000 soldiers. 50,000. The number hung in the air like smoke. There was no proof, no documents, no intercepted letters that could tie her to such acts. Only hearsay, jealous whispers, and the coded messages that had already been proven false. But the truth was irrelevant. France needed a scapegoat, and she was perfect for the part. The prosecutor, Captain Bouchardon, painted her as a woman without morals, a courtesan who sold her body and her loyalty to the highest bidder. He spoke of her lovers as if they were evidence, her beauty as if it were a weapon. The men in the jury nodded solemnly, their faces fixed, their thoughts unreadable. None of them asked how a dancer could have accessed the military's deepest secrets. None of them asked why the supposed messages contained information already public in the newspapers. The outcome had been written before the first witness was called. When her lawyer, Clunet, tried to defend her, he was interrupted again and again. He argued that she was guilty only of vanity, not treason. But in wartime, vanity was close enough. A woman who had dared to love across borders, who had lived without shame, was too easy to condemn. After the final testimony, Mata Hari stood to speak. Her voice was calm, her accent soft but clear. Yes, I took money. she said, "but I never betrayed anyone. I have always been loyal to France. I have loved French officers, and I have prayed for their victories. If that is treason, then I am guilty." No one answered. The silence felt heavier than any verdict. On the morning of July 25th, the jury deliberated for less than an hour. When they returned, their verdict was brief. Guilty. Sentence: death by firing squad. She listened without flinching, then turned to her lawyer and asked for a glass of water. Her only question afterward was whether she might still write to her daughter before the execution. Permission was granted, though the letter would never reach its destination. That night, in her cell at Saint-Lazare, she sat by the small barred window, looking at the fading sky. The city that had once adored her was silent now. She thought of her daughter Jean, of the Indies, of the stage lights that once burned like suns. Somewhere, she whispered a prayer not for mercy but for remembrance. If she had to die, then let the world at least remember the name. Mata Hari, Paris, on the morning of October 15th, 1917. The air was cold and clear, and a thin mist curled around the stone walls of the Vincennes fortress. Inside the Saint-Lazare prison, Mata Hari was awakened early. The sisters who tended the condemned brought her the clothes she had requested: a navy wool coat, a long skirt, gloves, and a tricorn hat. Though sentenced to death, she was allowed to dress properly before leaving her cell, a small concession granted to prisoners of public attention, both for humanitarian reasons and to avoid the appearance of cruelty before the press. She sat quietly on a wooden chair, brushing her hair and pinning it neatly at the back of her head. No one stopped her, for the act was not a privilege, but a last gesture of dignity. When the guards opened the door, she rose without hesitation. She neither wept nor pleaded. She refused the blindfold and the ropes. Her steps were calm and deliberate, as if she were walking toward a stage, not a firing line. Outside, 12 soldiers stood ready, rifles raised, the morning light glinting off the metal. The fog softened every sound. The officer in charge asked if she had any final words. She shook her head. Her eyes wandered toward the horizon, pale and colorless in the dawn. A witness later said she looked peaceful, almost detached, as though she had already stepped beyond fear. When the command was given, a stillness settled over the courtyard. Then came the crack of gunfire. Her body trembled once and fell backward, her coat folding softly beneath her. Her hat remained in place, the hair she had pinned that morning still neat. One soldier later swore he saw a faint smile at the corner of her mouth. The doctor approached, touched her neck, and quietly said she was gone. The officer fired a final bullet into her heart to make certain. No one came to claim her body. There was no flag, no prayer, no sound, but the echo fading across the stones. By noon, she had been buried in an unmarked grave. Yet the legend was already taking shape. Reporters printed her name, artists painted her final stance, and the myth of Mata Hari grew larger than the woman herself. They called her a spy, a traitor, the enchantress who danced her way into history. But those who had seen her that morning knew something else. She died not in disgrace, but with her head held high, exactly as she had lived. Long after the gunfire faded, the story of Mata Hari refused to die. In newspapers and books, she became everything the world needed her to be. To some, she was a dangerous woman who had played both sides. To others, she was a victim of men who feared her freedom more than her lies. The truth was quieter than either version, hidden beneath layers of performance and pain. Her real name was Margaretha Zell, born in the northern town of Leeuwarden in the Netherlands. Her father had been a hat maker who once promised her the world, but fortune vanished when his business failed. She married an older military officer, hoping for stability, but the marriage was brutal. 2 children were born, and one died in the colonies under mysterious circumstances. When her husband took their daughter away, something in her broke. She left Holland and never looked back. That wound, the loss of her child and her home, became the silent engine behind everything she later became. In Paris, she reinvented herself, building a new life from imagination and silk. She knew that men worshipped what they did not understand, so she wrapped herself in mystery. Every gesture, every story she told, was a shield against the poverty and humiliation she had known. It worked for a time, but the world she moved through was built on hypocrisy. The same men who adored her on stage condemned her in the courtroom. They applauded her beauty, then called it deceit. They desired her independence, then punished her for it. When the war came, illusion collided with reality. A woman who lived by performance could not survive in a world ruled by suspicion. France was bleeding, desperate for someone to blame, and her name was already famous. A courtesan who had slept beside officers was an easy scapegoat. It was not justice they wanted, but sacrifice. The execution was not about guilt or innocence, but about cleansing fear with blood. Today, historians know she was never proven guilty. The coded messages that condemned her were mistranslated, the evidence circumstantial at best. But legends have a longer life than facts. Her story has been rewritten in novels, films, and plays, each version reflecting the age that tells it. She became the eternal archetype, the woman who dared too much, loved too freely, and paid too dearly. In truth, Margaretha Zell was not a saint or a villain. She was simply human, driven by the same hunger for meaning that drives us all. Her tragedy was not betrayal, but misunderstanding. She believed beauty could protect her. She believed stories could set her free. And in the end, it was those very stories that took her life. Perhaps that is why her name endures. Because in every age, there are still those who live by illusion, who wear masks to survive in a world that demands them. And we still look at them, as people once looked at Mata Hari, not sure whether to pity them, desire them, or fear them. Maybe that is the final mystery, that behind every legend lies a person who only ever wanted to be seen.